3 temps can do your job for half the cost. Brim, you're simply not cost-effective anymore. The word cost-effective didn't even sting. It landed soft like dust on the polished table between us. What cut deep was how he said it, leaning back in that Italian leather chair. I helped approve for the executive floor. His voice was casual, indifferent, like he was canceling a subscription I had given 18 years. I had built the entire compliance infrastructure from a 2-person skeleton into a system so airtight it had passed 5 federal audits without a single citation. I trained 3 generations of analysts, and just like that, I was a number in a spreadsheet. A restructuring, that's what they called it. Strategic labor cost realignment. On paper, it meant my salary was too high. But behind his words, behind that polite corporate cadence, I saw something else. Fear, a flicker in his eyes when I didn't flinch. He was terrified not of losing money, but of me, of what I knew. I didn't argue, I didn't cry, but don't confuse silence with consent. Stay with me till the end, because the truth flips this story completely on its head. I looked down at the manila envelope sliding across the table. Severance final pay. A non-disclosure agreement. His hand stopped just short of mine, waiting. I assume you'll want to take the afternoon, he added. I didn't answer. I reached for the envelope, not with trembling fingers, but with steady hands. My thumb grazed the company logo embossed in gold. I closed it without reading. Then I did something he wasn't expecting. I picked up the ceramic dish sitting near the edge of the table, the one with the stale biscotti. No one ever ate. I placed it carefully back on the tray, wiped the crumbs into my palm. I wasn't going to leave a mess for the next woman who'd sit here. When I rose, the chair let out a soft sigh. I didn't push it back hard or make a statement with the exit. I simply stood, straightened the collar of my navy blazer, and took one last look at the floor-to-ceiling window. The city below looked exactly as it did yesterday, but I was no longer looking down at it. I was seeing through it as I walked down the hallway. The low hum of the HVAC system echoed like a hollow tunnel. No one made eye contact. The junior team looked up and then quickly down at their screens. One of them, the youngest, opened her mouth slightly like she wanted to say something, but I shook my head once. Not here, not now. I passed the break room, the same half-empty coffee pot, the cheap creamer, the Post-it notes on the fridge, asking people not to steal lunches. My mug was still there, white porcelain, a blue striped chipped rim. I left it. Let them figure out who it belonged to. At the elevator, I pressed the button once. No double check. No turning back. Just as the doors began to slide open, I glanced at my reflection in the polished chrome. I didn't look broken, I looked clear. As the elevator descended, my phone buzzed once. Then again, I didn't check. I knew the pattern, HR confirmation. Exit instructions, possibly a performative. We'll miss you. I knew better. Tomorrow they'd realize what they'd really lost. But by then, I'd be somewhere else, unreachable, unbothered, and very much aware of the chaos that was about to unfold. I didn't pack up right after the termination meeting. I returned to my desk, opened my laptop, and typed 3 lines of code. Only I knew. Locking down the core compliance system I had built in my 4th year at the company. No one paid attention. They were used to seeing me upright, focused typing nonstop. They thought I was working as always. I didn't say goodbye. I didn't cry in the bathroom. I didn't post on LinkedIn. I began to disappear, but with precision. One of the junior analysts called IT. She couldn't access the legacy framework directory. I rang my extension business as usual. I answered calmly. I'm no longer the contact for that. No bitterness. No edge, just fact. They tried to reset the system. Unaware that I'd written the architecture they were fumbling through, I began removing the permissions quietly. Not deleting, just concealing. The archives I'd protected for years. Internal audits, policy revisions, compliance maps were now encrypted and moved to a secure drive with a secondary copy sent to a dormant email account I created back in 2012. No one noticed. No one asked. I saved every edit trail, 18 years of files flagged. Transactions. quietly altered clauses, internal proposals I'd submitted and been told were too detailed or too expensive to implement. I printed 2 sets. One, I sealed in an envelope. The other, I mailed to a private banking address overseas, addressed to the only person I trusted, my cousin in Toronto. She's a licensed auditor. She doesn't know what's coming. But I do, and if anything collapses, she'll know what to do. I slipped on a pair of thin black gloves before closing the laptop, not to hide fingerprints, just to exit clean. That night, I walked out of the building like I always did. No cardboard box, no coat draped dramatically over my arm, just one black leather bag, old but reliable. The elevator doors closed behind me. So did the executive suite's silent glass doors. No one ran after me. No one saw me leave. I didn't expect them to. I walked home, no cab. I needed the wind, the distance, the quiet. The March air was sharp and bracing. I didn't feel sadness. I felt weightless. For 18 years, I had always glanced back. This time I didn't look back, but I still had the key. Before bed, I logged into a system no one knew existed. I'd built it for myself years ago. I called it Failover. It wasn't a backup, it was proof. 3 days later, the first call came from a blocked number I didn't answer. 4 more came that week from a junior VP, a compliance coordinator, and eventually from the executive assistant of the man who let me go. Still, I said nothing. No text, no call, not even a read receipt. Silence became my architecture. Then came the email, subject line, urgent. Possible data breach in internal system. It was sent at 2:14 a.m., flagged high priority. A ping in the night, I ignored. By Monday morning, the whispers had turned to tremors. 2 clients flagged discrepancies in reporting. A third escalated publicly. It wasn't catastrophic yet, but in a tightly regulated banking sector, it only takes 1 leak for the sharks to smell blood. And this time, I was the missing plug. A former colleague, Darren, someone I trained, texted me privately, "They're scrambling. Audit logs are incomplete. The executive floor is losing it." Then a second message, "They said you took something. They're looking at IT. Access history." I left him on read. It wasn't revenge, it was restraint. The systems were still functional but fractured. The parts they thought were plug and play weren't designed to be separated. I'd built the core compliance model as an ecosystem, not a stack of files. When they removed me, they removed context. They were running blind, and I had all the light. One of the calls that week came from his direct line. No assistant, no filter. I didn't answer. He left a message. "Brim, I know you're upset. This isn't personal. We were advised to cut costs across senior roles. If there's anything you'd be willing to help clarify." His voice cracked slightly on the word clarify. It wasn't the tone of a confident leader. It was the tone of a man who knew he'd made a mistake, but couldn't afford to say it out loud. I listened to the message once, then archived it. I started getting calls at home. I never gave out that number. Only one person on staff had it, and she must have been coerced. Then emails started arriving from legal, from HR, from an outside consultant asking for collaborative insight. They used words like urgent, critical, unforeseen gaps, reconstructive timeline. They didn't use the word help, but it hovered between every line I brewed. Coffee, let it go cold. Watered my plants, took long walks. For the first time in 18 years, I woke without an alarm. I was still, but not stagnant. I was watching, waiting. I logged into their public site, where disclosures had to be posted per compliance regulation. A new notice had been added, update adjustments to our internal controls. Following advisory resignation. They had called me an advisory resignation. I laughed. They didn't fire me. They deleted me. But deletion doesn't work on systems built with memory. Sometimes the hardest part isn't proving them wrong. It's choosing not to answer when they come begging for your voice. Have you ever held back your truth, not out of fear, but out of power? That Thursday, I received a courier envelope at my door. Hand-delivered. No signature required. Inside was a printout. Not digital. Old school. It was a snapshot of System Log's manual. Annotations scribbled in panic. Red ink circled missing entries, flagged inconsistencies. Timestamps that didn't align. At the bottom in his handwriting, "If you're willing to talk. I'm available. Please no letterhead, no legalese. Just desperation." That night, I opened the windows of my apartment and let the city noise in. I stood barefoot on the cold tile, letting the night air touch my skin. The skyline blinked with boardroom mistakes. I thought of all the years I kept things running so no one else had to know the chaos behind the curtain, all the late nights, all the cover-ups. I politely flagged, but was told to handle discreetly. Now they wanted me to clean it up again, but this time they would have to pay the full price. Not in money and exposure. I placed the courier envelope in my fireplace and lit it. The red ink curled and blackened. The phone rang again. This time I answered. I didn't say hello. I said, why now? It started with a single message from a woman named Celeste Park, managing director at a mid-tier investment bank I used to compete against a decade ago. She'd been the sharp one in meetings. Quiet, calculated, and always watching. We hadn't spoken since a compliance panel in 2014. She remembered everything subject. Are you free for coffee? No obligations, just respect. There was no logo, no pitch. Just that line. I sat with it for a full day. Then I replied. We met in a bookstore cafe near the Harbor Neutral ground. She wore a blazer over jeans and brought no assistant, no files, no laptop. I respected that. I didn't bring anything either. I saw your name, she said simply, and I saw the filings. I read between the lines. I said nothing. I didn't need to. I'm not here to hire you out of pity, she continued. I'm here because you built something no one else understood until you were gone, and because we need someone who can rebuild intentionally. That word landed softly. Intentionally. I looked at her fingers wrapped around a ceramic cup. Green tea. Not coffee, calm hands. She wasn't desperate. She wasn't recruiting. She was choosing. She pulled out a small notepad. Just 3 words written in pen, blank slate. Authority, discretion. That was the offer. Not a title, not a salary figure. A proposal of space to create and to be respected in the process. I didn't nod. I didn't smile. I just whispered. I'd start by eliminating departments that exist just to slow down integrity. She chuckled. That's exactly what I hoped you'd say. We didn't talk contracts. We didn't even shake hands. We just sat, 2 professionals who'd survived long enough to speak without translating. When I walked out into the sunlight, I felt no vindication, no celebration, just a long breath. As if my lungs were relearning how to hold space again. At the new office, there was no tour, no onboarding slideshow, just an empty desk and a secure login. I set up myself. I didn't tell anyone from my old company. I didn't update my LinkedIn. Some bridges don't need to be burned. They need to be left alone to rot quietly. On my first morning, I reviewed their internal structure. It was solid but too cautious, designed by people afraid of rocking the boat. I wasn't afraid anymore. A young analyst knocked gently and slid in a file for review. She looked like someone who had never been allowed to speak in meetings. I handed it back with a note. I want your opinion, not just your math. She blinked once, then smiled like someone who'd been waiting for that line her whole career. Later that week, Celeste passed me in the hallway and said, We're giving you full access to legacy architecture. Your name's on the blueprint now. I didn't thank her. I just said, Then let's draw it clean. It was Darren again. He asked to meet as a friend, which was a stretch, considering he hadn't so much as liked a single internal proposal of mine in 5 years. But something in his message was off. Less networking, more confessional. I agreed. Neutral ground again. A park bench beneath a willow tree, far from the city's buzz. He arrived late, wore guilt-like cologne. I shouldn't even be talking to you, he started. No hello? But I need you to know, you were never too expensive. That was a cover. I didn't flinch. He looked around before speaking again, like a man smuggling more than secrets. They needed you gone before the audit review. That word audit, I knew it. I just never expected someone to say it out loud. They didn't want you flagging the new executive partnership contracts. The ones rushed through in Q4. There's a clause that redirects a percentage of non-declared surpluses into a discretionary fund. It's off-ledger, and it's going to the holding company. Offshore, his voice cracked. He wasn't built for this kind of weight. They used your system for years to prevent this kind of thing. But then they started bypassing parts of it. Quietly, you designed everything too clean, too traceable. I folded my hands, rested them on my lap. You're saying I got fired because I made the system too honest? Darren nodded. They knew if you saw those files, you'd raise hell. So they made it about cost. They made it look like strategy. He handed me a folder thin but heavy in implication. Inside printouts of contracts redlined with dates that didn't align, signatures that didn't match. One had my old initials typed next to a field I never approved. At the bottom of the folder, a single paperclip warped and hanging loosely. A system once meant to hold everything together, now bent beyond repair. I didn't thank him. I didn't promise anything. I just nodded once and walked away. The folder tightened my hands. I felt it in the paper, the truth had weight. Back home, I placed the documents on my kitchen counter. The overhead light flickered as I turned the pages. It was all there, fraud masked as efficiency, strategy masking, self-preservation. I stared at my reflection in the microwave door, barely visible in the glass. How many things had I ignored? How long had I been keeping the system alive that was now being used to erase me? I reached for my phone. My hands didn't shake. My thumb hovered over a name I hadn't touched in years. Miriam Tolland, a senior investigative auditor with ties to the SEC. She and I once argued over framework philosophy at a conference in D.C. We hadn't spoken since, but she had principles, and I had documents. I pressed the call button. She picked up on the third ring. "Brim," she said, voice flat but alert. "I didn't expect. I have something you need to see, something you'll want documented before the next quarter closes." Pause. Then, where and when I gave her the address. I didn't explain more. I didn't need to. That night, I took the bent paperclip and set it beside my laptop. Not to use, just to remember. They thought I was the system's memory. They forgot I was also its conscience. The news broke on a Thursday morning. Not on headlines, not on public forums, but within the silent corridors of power. A confidential review request had been submitted to the board's audit subcommittee. Anonymous tip, time-stamped, attached with over 80 pages of evidence. Of course I wasn't named, but I recognized the formatting, the folder structure, the deliberate tone. Miriam had done exactly what I expected her to, pull the thread carefully, methodically. By the following Monday, internal meetings were quietly canceled. Email threads stopped mid-conversation. The leadership Slack went dark. They were afraid, but not of public shame. They were afraid of something worse being read. That same day, Celeste walked into my new office and handed me a plain envelope. She didn't sit. She didn't speak. Inside was a proposal. One line bolded, Project Structural Recovery for former institution lead role Brim Dallard. Underneath it, a note in Celeste's handwriting. "They're asking for help, but you don't owe them anything." It came hours later. Someone from the old company, anonymous, had sent it. No card, just the broken brass nameplate from my old door, cracked at the center, wrapped in a velvet pouch. I stared at it for a long time, tracing the edge with my thumb. Even broken, it carried weight. But now it didn't carry me. The next day, I entered the building I once helped build, this time as an outside consultant, not an employee. A different badge, a different stance. No apology. No nods exchanged, only wary glances. I walked the same hallway in different shoes. They didn't fit the floor anymore, and I liked that. At the executive boardroom, they waited stiff, silent. The same man who had said I was not cost-effective rose half-heartedly to greet me. "Brim," he said, trying to coat familiarity over regret. I let the silence speak, then I placed the design blueprint on the table, not to fix, to rebuild. Here's what I'll do, I said, voice flat. I'll trace back every bypass you authorized, every system override. Not to punish, but to prevent? They fidgeted, avoided my eyes. I'm not here to restore your reputation. I'm here to restore compliance. He cleared his throat. Of course, and we're grateful you're willing to. I'm not doing it for you. I looked out the window. The skyline remained unchanged, but everything beneath it had shifted. There are people working 3 levels down who still believe this place is worth saving. I'm doing it for them. I spent the next 48 hours reviewing server access logs, interviewing mid-level staff, restoring the chain of custody in system controls they'd half destroyed. Not a single thank you, not a single apology, but I didn't need one. I wasn't back for redemption. I was back for reconstruction. Late into the second night, I opened a locked drawer in my new office and placed the broken nameplate inside. Carefully, not to preserve it, but to bury it. I opened the window. Cool air drifted in. Behind me, the monitors hummed. The code aligned. The system this time would breathe on its own. The board called it a success. The regulators called it a recovery. I called it closure, but not the kind that ends something, the kind that opens space. 3 weeks into the rebuild, I asked for a room on the lower floor, a room they hadn't used in years. Once a training center, now a storage dump for unused hardware and outdated HR posters. No one had stepped foot in it since 2019. I cleaned it out myself, pulled down the yellowed banners, hauled out old monitors, swept the dust from the corners, not because I had to, because I needed to. I turned it into a training hub. Not for onboarding, not for HR compliance, for resilience. I invited 3 junior analysts, 2 of whom had been overlooked for promotions during the last restructuring. The third had once covered for me during a triple audit while nursing her mother in the hospital. I handed them printed packets, not PowerPoints, not PDF links. Real paper, real ink. Each packet carried a section of the new system logic. Modular, transparent, and most of all shareable. No more single-point dependencies. No more silent experts whose work could be erased with a severance letter. One of the analysts asked, "Why are you showing us all this?" I looked at her. Because I'm leaving. Not now, but soon. And when I do, I want this place to survive the next purge. The other 2 looked confused. The first one just nodded. I wrote line after line of process logic, not attributed to myself. No initials. No authorship. What mattered wasn't who built it. It was that anyone could maintain it. That was the legacy worth protecting. Outside the room, the company was still in chaos quietly. There were still board members scrambling to reposition their reputations. Still whispers about who signed what, who benefited. But none of them came near this floor. This floor felt like a clean draft, like something that could begin again without being erased later. One afternoon, Celeste visited the room. She didn't speak at first, just stood at the door watching. "You could stay," she finally said. I smiled, not with triumph, but with release. I could. But I won't. She nodded, almost expecting it. There's a difference between being necessary and being irreplaceable. I said I was both. And that was the problem. I returned to my apartment the next evening and stood on the balcony holding a worn-out folder. My personal notes legacy drafts, old credentials. I didn't burn it. I didn't archive it. I placed it in a drawer, locked it, and turned off the light. The system didn't need me anymore, and that was exactly what I had wanted to build all along. I didn't come back to get even. I came back to build something that couldn't be broken again. Not by ego. Not by silence. Not by fear. And you, have you ever created something so strong, it no longer needs you to protect it? There was supposed to be a signature mine at the bottom of a document I had built from scratch day by day over 6 brutal months. But when I opened that drawer, the paper was there, crease-stained and unsigned. My name crossed out in smudged black ink, like I had never mattered, like I was never even there. If you've ever poured yourself into something only to be erased like a footnote, no one wanted, please stay with me until the end. this isn't just about betrayal. It's about remembering who we are when they try to write us out. The drawer gave a soft click when I pulled it open. It was the kind of sound I'd heard hundreds of times after all. It was my drawer, my office, my work. But that morning it felt different, as if the wood resisted my touch, as if the files inside were no longer mine to keep. I reached past the usual clutter pens, notepads, breath mints. No one ever took and found it. The project authorization form, my form. Only now the corner was bent. There was a coffee ring near the signature line, and my name printed so clearly just days ago had been crossed out with a single bold stroke of permanent marker. No initials, no corrections, no replacement name. Just an absence, the kind that speaks louder than any memo. I stared at it for too long, frozen. It wasn't just ink. It was dismissal made physical. A deletion masked as an oversight. The Rowan they once needed had been erased. I sank into the leather chair, still warm from when I'd sat there yesterday, finalizing the line items, checking payment requests, calculating hours down to the minute. I had closed that file with a deep breath and a satisfied nod. I had no reason to believe anything had gone wrong. Until now, the office around me buzzed with its usual polished chaos. Phones rang. Laughter drifted from the break room. The glass walls made everything feel transparent. Everything but intent, because intent, I was learning, lived in the shadows. In quiet decisions made after meetings you weren't invited to. In forms like this one left behind, like breadcrumbs for the too curious. I held the paper closer. The smudge across my name looked accidental, but it wasn't. It was too deliberate, too wide. They didn't want my approval. They wanted me silent. 6 months of project labor. Night after night, logging hours after my daughter had fallen asleep. Rewriting timelines, negotiating vendor terms. I even cut my own salary 1 month to meet budget forecasts. And now, nothing, no signature, no memo, no explanation, just a black line. I pressed the form flat against the desk, smoothing the paper as if that could bring the name back. My name, but it didn't return. Outside my office door, someone passed by. They didn't pause, they didn't knock. I looked up and realized something chilling. No one had greeted me when I walked in today. No. Hey, Rowan. No eye contact, no smiles, just silence. It was as if the building had already moved on, and I hadn't caught up, as if I had become untethered from the narrative. I folded the paper once, twice, then slid it into my purse. Not to keep it, to remember. Because I was going to find out who crossed my name out and why. But I wasn't going to ask. I wasn't going to argue, and I wasn't going to sign anything ever again without knowing who handed me the pen. This time, I'd be the one holding the marker, and I'd decide who stays on the page. I used to arrive before the lights came on. The hallway motion sensor would flicker awake as I stepped inside, slow, reluctant, the same hum from the fluorescent overhead, the same whir of the printer as it rebooted. There was comfort in that rhythm. A private ritual. The company still slept, but I was already alive inside it. This morning, the corridor stayed dark. I paused at the entrance, waved my hand under the sensor. Once, then twice. Nothing. A faint hum came from the vending machine at the far end, flickering with static. I walked past each door slowly, as if the darkness was trying to tell me something. I reached for the light switch near the break room but didn't flip it. I let the darkness settle around me. It wasn't that the lights had gone out. It was that they didn't turn on for me anymore. Inside my office, I sat down with my back straight, hands folded in my lap like a student waiting to be called on. The unsigned paper was no longer on my desk. I had taken it home last night, placed it in a box with other things. I never thought I'd need to prove. Award certificates. Handwritten notes from clients who had said, "We couldn't have done this without you." Now I wasn't sure they even remembered my name. I turned to the wall behind me, where the frame of my 10-year recognition plaque still hung. Gold edging black mount engraved nameplate with the company's old logo back when we still made printed handbooks, not digital dashboards. I took it down. It was lighter than I remembered. Or maybe I was just too tired to feel the weight. There was a smudge on the glass from when I first hung it. My fingerprint pressed slightly off-center. I had left it there on purpose once, like a quiet signature. Now I wiped it off with my sleeve. I left the frame on the floor, leaning against the wall, like something unfinished. Then I opened my briefcase, the old leather one my father had given me when I first got promoted. Inside, I found a folded project roadmap I hadn't looked at in months. We had called it Sunstream. The name had meant something back then. A new direction, an internal reinvention. I had pushed so hard for it to succeed. Now it sat there like a punchline to a joke I hadn't realized was being told. Across the hallway, I saw a reflection. Movement in the glass panel. A new hire. I didn't know her name, walked past without a glance. She had on one of the branded polos they handed out at onboarding, the kind I helped design. Her reflection passed through mine without pause, and I realized I wasn't invisible. I was already gone. My thumb brushed the corner of the folder still in my lap. A part of me wanted to walk out with everything clear. The shelf ripped the nameplate off the door, demand an answer from whoever had blacked out my name. But instead, I stood up slowly. My heels echoed once, then again as I stepped back into the corridor. No one turned. The light above me flickered once, then again, and then it stayed off. There's a kind of silence that doesn't feel empty. It feels strategic. Like someone somewhere has decided you don't belong in the room and they just forgot to send you the memo. Or maybe they didn't forget. Maybe they wanted you to notice the absence first. It began with the calendar. I refreshed it 3 times that morning, watching as my name vanished line by line. The weekly syncs, the Monday budget review, the Thursday with compliance. My color code deep forest green was gone from every square. Only pale yellows and light blues remained. Their names filled the spaces like a crowd closing in around a shrinking shape. No one mentioned it, not even Kayla the Junior. I had mentored last summer. She walked past my desk that afternoon with a quick smile and a file folder clutched to her chest. The same folder I had carried for years. Now in her hands, it looked like it belonged. "Hey, Rowan," she said, casually. Almost like it was still normal. I nodded. I didn't trust my voice. I waited until she turned the corner before pulling open my drawer, retrieving the laminated team org chart I kept tucked beneath a stack of vendor lists. I scanned the list twice. My title was still there. But the responsibilities, they had shifted. Subtly, like sand underfoot. The compliance reports I had owned were now marked temporary. Kayla. The Sunstream oversight was noted as Project Lead TBE. TBD. Not reassigned, not transferred. Just to be determined, as if I never mattered enough to be replaced properly. My fingers clenched around the edge of the chart, pressing into the laminate until the plastic creaked. I stared at my own name, then at the initials beside the word mentor, still RG, still me, only. It wasn't. Rose it from my chair slower than usual. My heel caught on the edge of the carpet, something that had never happened before, the kind of stumble that makes you feel small even when no one sees. The break room was full. Laughter ricocheted off the tile. A carton of cupcakes sat open on the counter with a sticky note that read, "Congrats, Kayla. Client win." I didn't ask which client I already knew. Mine. I walked to the sink, turned on the tap, and watched the water run cold over my hands. My reflection stared back at me from the metal faucet, distorted warping with the water's ripple. It didn't look like defeat, but it didn't look like me either. On the way back to my desk, I passed the meeting room labeled Atlantic. Through the frosted glass, I could make out the silhouettes of 5 people around the table. One of them was Greg, the VP, who used to CC me on every client note. Now his shoulders turned away from the door, toward someone else. The screen on the wall displayed a slide I had designed. still using my formatting, still my visual flow. But my name was nowhere. I stood there a little too long, long enough for one of the silhouettes to glance toward the glass, and then quickly look away. That's the thing about being phased out. No one tells you, they just start using your work without you. I returned to my desk, sat down, opened my laptop. The screen lit up like it always did. Only this time, the background image, the one I had changed last quarter to the Sunstream horizon, was gone, replaced by the company's default logo. No more sunset, no more metaphor. Just branding. I clicked into my task list. Empty, not archived, not reassigned. Just blank. My hands hovered over the keyboard, then dropped to the desk. They weren't giving me less to do. They were giving me nothing, because nothing is louder than being included. Just enough to notice that you've been excluded. I don't think I'm the only one who's ever sat quietly in the same room they helped build, only to feel like a ghost in it. Have you ever felt yourself fading in a place that once needed your whole heart? It wasn't anger that came first. It was clarity, the kind that creeps in through the seams, quiet, steady. Until suddenly, the air feels thinner, sharper. Like your lungs have been trained to breathe. Betrayal before you even knew the word for it. It started with a forwarded email. The subject line read Q2 review for Greg only. It shouldn't have reached me. Maybe someone hit the wrong key. Maybe someone didn't care anymore. But there it was, buried deep in the thread. 4 layers down was a single sentence. Repurpose RG is code for expense match. She won't flag it. I read it twice. Then again, repurpose. That wasn't a mistake. That was strategy. They had taken the custom code I wrote for invoice validation, a clean, tight module I had built myself at midnight 3 months ago, and twisted it to mask overages. Overages that looked suspiciously like personal charges rerouted through project lines. I leaned back in my chair, the leather creaking beneath me, like it too had something to say. On my desk, a fountain pen lay still uncapped. The ink had dried at the tip, crusted dark, like a wound. I hadn't written with it in weeks. I had been typing, clicking, nodding, trusting. A breeze from the air vent stirred the corner of a notepad nearby. It flapped once, twice, then stilled. The list at the top said audit prep in my handwriting. Underneath, cross-check vendor 00329. Flagged. I had circled it 3 times. I had asked Greg about it last quarter. He told me it was a one-off. He told me to drop it. I did. Because back then, I still believed in team. I opened the old budget tracker I had kept on my personal drive, one no one else had access to. My fingers moved faster now. With purpose, I cross-referenced vendor codes against date-stamped purchase orders. Then I saw it. 6 charges to a luxury rental service, all within the project window, all billed under external consulting. Only the names listed weren't consultants. They were Greg's family members. I didn't gasp. I didn't clench my fists. I just stared. My office felt smaller all of a sudden. The windows that once framed a view of the skyline now felt like a cage. The blinds were half open, casting horizontal lines across the wall like slats. I closed the laptop gently. My hands rested on the surface for a second longer, palms flat, not pressing. Just feeling the betrayal wasn't loud. It didn't punch or scream. It simply was. A fact now undeniable, and once you see it, you can't unsee it. My eyes drifted to the framed print behind my desk. A gift from the team 2 years ago. Trust is built in drops, but lost in buckets. At the time we laughed, said it was cheesy, Rowan. The rainmaker, they called me, always making the forecast work. Now I understood. I wasn't the rainmaker, I was the reservoir. Drained slowly, drop by drop, until there was nothing left but the mud. I stood, walked it to the door, and pulled it closed for the first time in months. Not slammed, just enough to hush the office hum. Enough to give me space to think. And then, for the first time since this all began, I picked up my phone. Not to call HR, not to call Greg. I called myself, left a voice memo. My voice was quiet, steady. Rowan flag vendor. 00329, search Q2. Note cross charges under consulting, timeline match to Sunstream development cycle. Note initiate copy to offline drive tonight. I ended the recording. Then I saved it. Not because I needed a reminder, because I needed proof that I still saw what was true, and I was no longer pretending not to. Some people react with fire. I've always reacted with fabric, layers, folds, threads pulled tighter, the more you're underestimated. That morning, I chose silence over confrontation, but it wasn't the kind of silence that came from fear. It was the kind you wrap around yourself like armor no one sees. I dressed slowly, not in black, not in red. I wore gray, a soft, structured gray blouse with no wrinkles and no labels, a shade that matched neither surrender nor defiance, just presence. The hallway was quiet when I arrived. No small talk near the coffee machine. No awkward glances, just the low mechanical sound of the elevator descending, like something was being lowered into a vault. I stepped in. The mirrored walls reflected my frame back at me from 3 angles. I didn't look powerful. I looked still, contained. But my hand inside the pocket of my coat held the flash drive, small, cold. It pressed against my palm like a secret. I was finally ready to keep safe. As the elevator doors closed, I caught my own eyes. They weren't wide or afraid. They were alert, like a witness, like someone ready to record. I got off 1 floor above mine, just to walk the corridor, just to see who looked up. No one did, at my desk. The laptop booted up with a hum that sounded too loud. Too ordinary. I didn't check email. I didn't join the budget call. Instead, I opened a private folder named Legacy. It had been empty for years. I filled it, 1 document at a time, 1 forwarded email, 1 invoice comparison, 1 mismatched timestamp after another, everything cross-labeled clean. No anger in the file names. Just numbers, dates, facts. I copied it all to the flash drive, unplugged it, then I placed it in an envelope. No return label, no note, just 3 letters written in careful black ink. DPO, Director of Project Oversight. A role 3 floors above mine. A name I'd never spoken out loud, but I knew she existed. Knew she didn't like Greg. Knew she had once asked for access to the Sunstream metrics and was told Rowan's got it. All good. And I had nodded, because back then I was still covering for people who needed shadows. Now I was done shading others. I sealed the envelope, ran 1 line of clear tape across the flap, then slipped it into the outgoing mail tray. Not office mail. External courier. It would be logged by 11. Jure, gone by 11:15. By noon, it wouldn't be mine anymore. And that oddly was a comfort. My hands, once shaky now, rested flat on the desk. I looked down at my fingers. The nails were short clean, but one had a faint smudge of ink from when I labeled the envelope. Not dramatic, not accidental, just real. The door to the conference room opened across the hall. Greg walked out, talking to someone I didn't recognize. Likely another contractor. He'd slide under a vague title. He didn't glance in my direction, but I looked up, and for a brief second, I watched him laugh. That same laugh he used when he'd say things like, "It's just paperwork, Rowan. Don't overthink it." I used to nod. Now? I blinked slowly and looked away. Because I had thought long enough. At 5:03 p.m., I shut my laptop. I wiped down my desk, took nothing but my coat and an empty notebook. On the way out, I pressed the elevator button once, hard enough to feel it, but not enough to bruise. As the doors slid open, the mirrored walls waited. I stepped in and faced the back wall. This time, not the front. I didn't need to watch the floors go down. I knew exactly where I was going, and more importantly, I knew exactly who I was taking with me. Some storms start without thunder. No crack, no warning, just a change in air pressure that only the attuned can feel. That's what silence was to me now. A shift in the room. A signal. A starting line. I didn't return to my desk the next morning. I didn't send any explanations. Instead, I deactivated my access. One click. One log out. One final step away from a system I had kept running long after it stopped recognizing my name. The screen blinked once. Session ended. Not expired, not denied, ended. Because I said so, I left the badge on my kitchen counter. Let it rest there beside my keys and a piece of toast I never touched. The sun poured through the window, too bright for how calm I felt. It lit the glass coffee table in a way that made it look clean and sharp, like the surface of a lake frozen in early winter. I reached for my phone, not to email, not to scroll. I tapped a single contact, Evelyn, private. She picked up on the second ring. Rowan. Hi, just checking in. Her pause was short, but telling. Is everything all right? I have a question, I said, about preferred vendors. If someone were trying to reassign project leadership mid-cycle, how would that affect contract renewals? She didn't answer right away. She was cautious like that, always had been. Finally. Why are you asking me that on a personal line? I smiled without sound. No reason? Another pause, then the tone shifted. Is there something I should be looking at? I didn't reply, but I didn't need to. The silence was the reply she exhaled. Understood. When I ended the call, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt measured, like the first time you realize you can walk away from a conversation without needing to be right. I stood at the window, mug in hand, still warm, not yet gone cold. Across the street, a woman walked her dog in deliberate steps, stopping at every tree. Everything in her world looked slow, controlled, intact. I wondered if she had ever been betrayed by someone who smiled in meetings but erased her behind closed doors. Probably. We all had our Gregs. The day passed not in action but in omission. I didn't answer the calendar pings. I didn't reply to Slack. I didn't forward a single update. And by 3 p.m., the texts began. Hey, just wondering if you're on this call. Rowan, were you copied on that client brief? Need your eyes on the final doc? Are you available? I didn't reply because absence, used with intention, speaks louder than noise. By 4:12 p.m., Greg texted directly. Need a quick clarification on Sunstream timeline and vendor alignment. Quick call. I read it once, then powered down the phone. Not airplane mode. Not do not disturb. Off, let the questions sit. Let them wonder. Let them feel the shape of the space I used to fill. I stood in the middle of my living room, surrounded by nothing but light and breath. I opened my closet, pulled out an envelope I'd prepared the night before. Inside a printed summary. Anonymous, factual, documented, sealed. No note, no name, just the truth. I slipped it into a padded courier pouch marked to be delivered. Evelyn Cross. Confidential. Then I left it by the door. I didn't call. I didn't confirm. I didn't look back. Somewhere in the city wheels were already turning. Not because I shouted, but because I stopped turning theirs. Because silence is not surrender, it's strategy. And I had just played my move. What would you do if someone who once dismissed you was now reaching out desperate for your help? Would you answer? Or would you let the silence speak for you? The first call came just after 9 a.m. I didn't answer it. I let the phone buzz once, twice, then fall silent on its own. A muted vibration on the counter, muffled by the edge of a dish towel, still innocuous. But something in me stirred anyway. Not anxiety. Not even satisfaction. Recognition. They had noticed, by noon, there were 5 more. 2 from Greg, 1 from Kayla, 2 from numbers with no caller ID, the kind routed through internal switchboards when someone doesn't want to leave a trace. Each call was a ripple, not panic yet, but cracks were forming. I sat at the kitchen table, hands wrapped around a mug of herbal tea. I hadn't touched. The steam had long disappeared. The surface was still, a mirror for anyone willing to stare into it long enough. Across the table, my laptop remained closed. Instead, I had my old planner open, the leather-bound one I stopped using when we switched to digital dashboards. The pen beside it was heavier than I remembered. Metal engraved, a gift from the department 4 years ago. To Rowan, the quiet anchor. Back then, I had smiled at the inscription. Now it felt exact. They hadn't meant it as power, but it was the kind that doesn't ask for applause. The kind that doesn't need to raise its voice. The kind that only becomes visible when removed. At 12:47, Evelyn texted. One sentence. Meeting rescheduled. Greg asked for immediate clarity. I didn't reply. But I imagined his tone, the tightness at the corners of his mouth when he doesn't know what someone else knows, the way he grips the edge of the conference table just before he decides whether to deflect or lie. I imagined him searching for files I had pulled offline, logs I had already duplicated, connections I no longer maintained, but had documented before I left. Every gap he reached for now was a space I had once filled, and now, without a word, I had become the outline of a hole he couldn't patch. At 2:11, the voicemail started. I didn't listen, I didn't need to. The screen displayed 7 new messages. I flipped the phone over face down and let the silence reclaim the room. It was peaceful here. Light moved slowly across the hardwood floors. My houseplants bent gently toward the window, unconcerned with corporate collapse. Outside, a child laughed from a passing stroller. That kind of laugh that doesn't know stress, doesn't know betrayal. I let it wash over me because I remembered something. They hadn't removed me. They had misplaced me, and now they were looking too late for what they thought could be reinstalled like software. But I wasn't a system. I was a structure, and they'd built too much of it on me by 4:00 p.m. Greg called again. This time he left a message marked urgent. I watched the notification slide across the screen. Watched it vanish. Then I opened the Notes app and typed 5 words. They noticed when I left. That was it. Not a novel. Not an accusation. Just a truth that didn't need dressing. I closed the app, walked to the window, pulled the curtain aside. Outside, the sky had shifted. Not dark, not stormy, just a different light, cooler, calmer, like the atmosphere was adjusting to something unspoken. And in that moment, I realized this wasn't revenge. This wasn't a takedown. This was gravity. I didn't need them to fall. I just needed them to feel the absence of what they took for granted, and they were feeling it now. I didn't make a plan. I made a pause, and for the first time in months, that was enough. There was no checklist on the wall, no pitch deck, no scheduled Zoom link waiting to blink green. Just morning and space, and the low hum of the city waking up slower than I used to allow myself. I sat in the corner of my apartment by the window, the one spot that caught the morning light in diagonal lines across the floor. The wood grain looked different there, warmer, honest. Beside me, a blank notebook. Not corporate issued, no logo embossed in silver foil. Just ivory pages stitched into a soft brown cover. I opened to the first page, still blank, and I didn't rush to fill it. Because this wasn't about writing something new. It was about deciding what deserved space in my story now. What remained after extraction. After the facade peeled, after the silence settled, I thought about the things I'd built inside that company. The systems, the pipelines, the trusted templates that had become their crutches. I had designed safety nets, and they never even realized they were standing on them. Until I pulled back. Now they knew. But this part, this rebuilding, wasn't about showing them what they lost. It was about choosing what I kept. I didn't start with a business name. I didn't announce anything online. I just made a list. Not of contacts, but of truths. I no longer had to explain the value I brought. I would no longer fill silence with apologies. I didn't need their systems. I was the system. I closed the notebook gently. No slamming. No finality. Just placement on page in enough. I stood up, walked to the kitchen, and opened the drawer where I had placed the old flash drive. Still there, still untouched. I slid it into my pocket, not to use it, but to remember. A reminder that I had built what others needed to steal, and now I'd build without theft. I opened my laptop, not the work one, my own. Its background wasn't a brand. It was a photograph I took in Seattle 3 years ago. A quiet pier, fog rolling over water, light rising behind it. Not loud, but unstoppable. I created a new folder. I didn't name it Company. I didn't name it Launch. I named it Reclaimed, and then, without fanfare, I started writing a list of vendors I trusted, clients who had always looked me in the eye, notes on contract structures I would never agree to again. Things I had only thought in passing, now written with intention. Every document I opened, I chose. Every email I drafted, I owned. Every contact I saved, I remembered. By noon, I had no business. But I had a foundation, not built on urgency, built on integrity, and that I realized was the quiet revolution. Not walking away, but walking towards something better. Something designed by the person who had been designing for everyone else for too long. Later that afternoon, I lit a candle in the corner of the room. Not for mood, for ritual. Sandalwood sharp, grounded slightly smoky, the scent filled the air the way my presence used to fill a room, quiet but defining. I sat with it, let it linger. Because this wasn't a rush back into relevance. It was a return to center. And from this place, I wouldn't be asking for recognition. I'd be choosing visibility. On my terms, it arrived in the middle of an ordinary Tuesday. No knock, no ping, just the soft shuffle of paper sliding through the mail slot and falling onto the hardwood with a sound quieter than breath. I didn't open it right away. I saw the envelope, heavy stock, ivory-colored, and I knew. There was no sender name, no return address. But I didn't need either. Only people who once ignored you know how to make silence look expensive. I picked it up, turned it in my hands. The back flap was sealed with a thin strip of clear tape. Nothing ornate. No wax seal. Just 該有時而呢. Careful, measured, like the words inside had been revised too many times before anyone dared to send them. I didn't read it on the counter. I carried it to the corner window, the one with the soft chair and the too thin blanket I sat. Took a breath and opened it with a letter opener I hadn't used in years. Inside a single page. No company letterhead. No bolded titles. No greeting, just text. Plain sincere. In the way a trap can be when it's dressed like a peace offering. Rowan, we understand your departure may have been abrupt. In light of recent developments, leadership would like to extend an invitation for you to re-engage in select consulting capacity. There is great value in your experience, and your insight is missed. Please consider reconnecting. We are open to terms, warmly Greg, on behalf of Executive Committee. I let the letter fall onto my lap, unread a second time. They weren't asking for reconciliation. They were asking for repair of the cracks that had deepened in my absence, of the systems I had once held together with nothing but memory and instinct. They wanted the blueprint, the map, the woman who had disappeared without slamming the door. Because now they understood the silence had never been retreat. It had been the warning. My eyes followed the folds in the letter. Crisp pressed as if even paper knew it had to be perfect to be heard by me now. But perfection was not currency anymore, clarity was. And this was neither. I stood, letter still in hand. Walked to the bookshelf, found the leather box I kept beneath the lowest shelf. Not for keepsakes, for decisions inside were notes, hey. I never sent resignation drafts. I revised but never used. A photograph of the first team I led, back when we still believed being loyal would keep us safe. I placed the letter on top of them. Closed the lid, not because I needed to respond, but because I needed to remember. Sometimes power is the ability to say nothing and still be the loudest thing in the room. Have you ever had someone return, Not because they valued you, but because they needed you to fix what fell apart without you. Did you answer? Or did you let them sit with the silence they once gave you? I hadn't looked at the wall in weeks. The one above my desk. The one that used to hold the framed certificate with the company's name in gold foil. Excellence in Strategic Leadership, issued by people who now wrote emails without headers, signed by men who once smiled while editing my ideas into their own. It had hung there for 5 years. Untouched, undusted, worshipped in the way only overachievers know how to worship silent validation. But that morning, as the sun caught the corner of the room just right, I saw it for what it was, a mirror that no longer reflected anything I needed to see. I stood across the room and lifted it off the nail. The back was coated in a fine layer of dust, not because I'd forgotten it, but because I had once been afraid to touch it like it anchored something important. Now it felt like clutter. I carried the frame to the kitchen, leaned it against the backsplash, and replaced it with something else. A photo. New, simple, unframed. Just a printed image on matte paper. A screenshot of my phone from the week after I walked away, 48 missed calls. No names, just numbers, just red icons, just proof. I pinned it to the wall with one clean tack, and I stepped back. It wasn't art. It wasn't elegant, but it was accurate, because this was the portrait they had left me. Not applause, not gratitude, just the silence that followed when they realized the system didn't run itself. And now it faced me every time I worked. A reminder. Not of loss, but of leverage. I sat down, opened my notebook to the next page, wrote 3 words, "This is mine." Not the company, not the title, the story mine. To narrate, mine to edit, mine to end, or continue. I opened my inbox, scrolled past the unopened messages from Greg, past the meeting invite labeled "Catch Up from Kayla," ignored the calendar ping from an executive assistant I'd never met, and clicked compose not to reply, but to write something new. Dear Evelyn, thank you for your discretion. I've completed the internal summary. If requested, I can submit a formal debrief under NDA. Otherwise, I consider the matter closed on my end. No further contact is needed. Best Rowan Gray. No flourish. No threat, just closure. On my terms, I hit send, then closed the laptop. Not with force, just finality. The house was quiet again. No vibrations, no notifications. Just the soft sound of the candle still burning in the next room. I walked to it, watched the flame flicker, then gently exhaled. It went out with a curl of smoke. No drama, just a shift in light. And I smiled. Not because I'd won, because I'd reclaimed the only thing that couldn't be forged, deleted, or rewritten. My absence, and all the things they had to face in it. I didn't check the news. I didn't have to. The first sign came quietly, like most endings do. An email this time, not from Greg, but from a mutual contact who had once looped me into every team-wide thread with exclamation points and emojis. Hey, just a heads up, HR's making moves. Greg's on leave, internal audit's gone wide. Thought you should know. I read it, then deleted it. No folder, no screenshot, no follow-up. Because this time I wasn't archiving proof. The collapse was writing its own story now. A few hours later, I passed a co-working cafe on my walk home. Through the window, a familiar face sat hunched over a laptop, shoulders tense, jaw set tight. Kayla, she didn't see me, or maybe she did, and chose not to react. Either way, her posture told the truth. The scaffolding was falling. Inside her screen, reflected lines of red markup half-formed strategy docs, and what looked like a client complaint portal. I kept walking. Because I didn't need to hover at the ruins of what I'd left. Let them sit with the ghost of my systems. The undocumented logic, the invisible connections, the quiet things that held the place together. When they thought I was just being thorough, later that evening, Evelyn called. Not texted, called. I let it ring once before answering. Her voice was steady, but the edges had softened, like someone speaking to someone who had been right all along. Greg resigned today, she said. Effective immediately, a beat. Client confidence has dropped. 2 majors pulled out. One-sided, unstable continuity. I said nothing. There was nothing left to say. She continued a little quieter. They're rebranding, new leadership. Whole identity shift. You're not named, of course, but the ripple is yours. I looked out the window as she spoke. The city below moved like it always had. People rushing, cars idling. Life persisting, but I felt no urge to return to it. No victory. No vengeance. Just air. Clean, unburdened mine. Thank you for letting me know, I said finally. You did what most people only dream of. Rowan Evelyn said. You walked away, and they fell without you, lifting a hand. I ended the call. Then opened the window. Let the night in. Not cold, just real. And I stood there for a moment, barefoot, still quiet. No music. No alerts. No calendar invites. Just the sound of something ending, without me having to finish it. The box wasn't heavy. Not anymore. Just a small white rectangle taped at the edges. Its corners softened from sitting too long under the bed. Inside, one ID badge, a USB drive, a pressed nameplate from a door no longer hers, and a shirt, the pale blue button-down she used to wear on presentation days, the one she had ironed flat, only to never wear again, folded still perfect, still waiting for a version of her that no longer existed. She didn't cry. She didn't even hesitate. Rowan placed the box on the front step of the building she used to call her second home. No note, no message, no sender. Just closure. She stepped back, looked up once at the glass panels that no longer reflected her, and turned away. She didn't watch it be taken. She didn't need to, because sometimes release isn't about being seen, it's about not needing to be anymore. Back home, the space felt different. Not cleaner. Clearer. The candle she had left unlit for days now sat with its wick bent waiting. She didn't light it. Instead, she reached for the bottle of wine tucked away for years, gifted but never opened. No label. Just dark glass and a cork that gave way with one soft twist. She poured a single glass and raised it not to anyone, not to victory, to completion, that rare moment where nothing needs to be explained, defended, or understood, just closed. She took a sip, let it settle on her tongue, then walked to the bookshelf where all the evidence of before used to sit. Rows of binders, notes, strategy books, corporate souvenirs gone in their place now. Her journal, a small plant, and a new photo. Her on a quiet pier. Fog rolling in behind her, wind tugging at the corners of her coat. Taken just weeks ago, she pinned it above the desk. No frame, no plaque, but the caption written under it in soft pencil. Peace is proof. She sat down, let her hands rest on her knees, and breathed. Not because she had nothing left to do, but because everything she'd done had finally landed. Her silence had spoken. Her exit had echoed. Her stillness had shifted the structure she once carried alone. She hadn't fought for the last word. She'd simply stopped writing in their margins. Now the page was hers, blank wide and waiting. If you've ever been written off, forgotten, or silenced, but still chose to walk away whole instead of staying to be shattered, leave a single mark below. Not to shout, not to prove, just to say, I'm still here, and I know who I am.